Severe migrant crises threaten the Schengen Area by straining political solidarity between European nations and driving individual countries to reintroduce internal border controls. The migration challenge confronting Europe has become one of the defining geopolitical issues of the 21st century. The migrant crisis in Spain and Europe sustained an increase in irregular migration and asylum applications arriving through the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and the land borders between Europe and North Africa. Although Europe has experienced migration for decades, the crisis intensified after 2015 when conflicts in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and parts of Africa forced millions of people to flee their homes. While countries such as Germany, Italy, and Greece initially received the largest number of arrivals, Spain has increasingly become one of the principal entry points into the European Union through the Canary Islands, Ceuta, Melilla, and the Western Mediterranean route. Many analysts argue that Europe's current challenge is not simply about the number of migrants arriving but about the ability of the European Union to manage migration collectively. Recent events in Ceuta, where a sudden surge of migrants overwhelmed local infrastructure, highlighted this dilemma. The crisis triggered political disagreements among EU governments, renewed debate over border security, and raised questions about whether the EU's migration framework is sufficiently robust. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen praised Spain's response while stressing that the EU must strengthen its external borders and learn lessons from the incident. Against this background, Spain has become a testing ground for Europe's broader migration policy. The questions facing policymakers are no longer limited to border control. They now extend to asylum reform, labor market needs, cooperation with neighboring countries, internal EU solidarity, and even the future of the Schengen Area. Can the migrant crisis threaten the Schengen Area? The Schengen Area is one of the European Union's most visible achievements, allowing passport-free travel across most participating countries. However, Schengen relies on confidence that external borders are effectively managed. Migration pressure has repeatedly tested this principle. During periods of large-scale arrivals, several member states have temporarily reintroduced internal border controls, citing public security or migration concerns. These measures are permitted under Schengen rules in exceptional circumstances but are intended to remain temporary. Recent events surrounding Ceuta again revived debate over internal border controls. Some governments argued for stricter measures, while others warned against undermining one of Europe's greatest integration achievements. Migration experts generally believe that migration alone is unlikely to end Schengen. Instead, they argue that Schengen's future depends on whether member states maintain confidence in collective external border management. Could migration undermine European Union unity? Migration has become one of the most politically divisive issues within the European Union. Southern frontier states such as Spain, Italy, Greece, and Malta argue that they bear a disproportionate share of migration pressures because of geography. They seek greater solidarity from northern and eastern member states. Some Central and Eastern European governments have opposed mandatory relocation quotas and argue that migration policy should remain primarily a national responsibility. These disagreements have repeatedly delayed EU migration reforms over the past decade. The recent Ceuta crisis again exposed these divisions. According to Reuters and other reporting, several governments expressed concern that Spain's migration policies might create incentives for additional irregular migration, while Spain called for stronger European solidarity rather than criticism. Political scientists increasingly describe migration as one of the principal fault lines shaping contemporary European politics. Why has the migrant crisis occurred in Spain? Spain's migration challenge is the result of a combination of geography, geopolitics, economics, and demographics. Unlike many European countries, Spain sits directly on the frontier between Europe and Africa. It has two land borders with Morocco through the Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, while the Canary Islands lie relatively close to the West African coast. This geographic position makes Spain one of the most accessible entry points into the European Union for migrants departing from North and West Africa. Migration routes have changed considerably over the past decade. Earlier migration flows were concentrated on the Eastern Mediterranean route through Turkey into Greece and the Central Mediterranean route from Libya into Italy. As border controls strengthened along those corridors and political agreements altered migration patterns, the Western Mediterranean and Atlantic routes towards Spain became increasingly important. Human smuggling networks adapted quickly, shifting departure points toward Mauritania, Senegal, Morocco, and other West African countries. Conflict remains one of the principal drivers of migration. Armed violence in Sudan, instability across the Sahel, insecurity in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and continuing humanitarian crises elsewhere in Africa have displaced millions of people. While not all displaced persons seek to reach Europe, these conflicts contribute to a larger pool of people considering migration. Climate-related pressures, including drought, desertification, and declining agricultural productivity, further compound these challenges by undermining rural livelihoods and increasing economic insecurity. Economic disparities between Europe and neighboring regions also play a major role. Spain's economy, despite periodic slowdowns, offers significantly higher wages and better employment opportunities than many countries of origin. Migrants often perceive Spain not only as a destination but also as a gateway to the broader European labor market. Existing migrant communities in Spain reinforce these migration networks by providing information, financial assistance, and social support for new arrivals. Spanish Migration Minister Elma Saiz has defended the country's approach by arguing, Spain was once a country of migrants. Today it is a country of opportunities. She further described migration as a key contributor to Spain's economic and social development. Supporters of this approach argue that Spain's aging population and labor shortages require sustained migration. Critics contend that generous regularization policies may create incentives for additional irregular migration. This debate illustrates one of the central tensions in European migration policy, balancing humanitarian obligations with border management. How is Spain trying to manage the migrant crisis? Spain has adopted a strategy that combines border security, humanitarian assistance, labor market integration, and diplomatic cooperation. Unlike some European countries that primarily emphasize deterrence, Spain has generally pursued a mixed approach. It has strengthened border surveillance while also expanding legal migration pathways and regularization measures for some undocumented migrants, already contributing to the economy. Spanish authorities have increased patrols around the Canary Islands, expanded maritime search and rescue operations, and invested in reception facilities for asylum seekers. At the same time, Spain has worked with neighboring countries to reduce departures before migrants reach European waters. This reflects the view that migration cannot be managed solely at the border but must also address conditions in countries of origin and transit. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska has argued that implementing the EU's new migration framework requires combining stronger border management with respect for international protection obligations. Spain has therefore sought to balance enforcement with humanitarian responsibilities. How is the European Union addressing the migration crisis? The European Union has fundamentally reformed its migration framework through the Pact on Migration and Asylum, which entered into application in June 2026. The objective is to replace fragmented national approaches with a more coordinated European system. The pact introduces common procedures for screening migrants at external borders, harmonizes asylum processing, strengthens responsibility sharing among member states, and creates crisis management mechanisms for countries experiencing sudden migration surges. Every irregular arrival must undergo identity, health, and security screening before entering the asylum system. Border procedures are accelerated for applicants from countries generally considered safe, while stronger safeguards remain for vulnerable individuals. European Commissioner for Migration Magnus Brunner described the pact as a major milestone but cautioned that implementation would determine its success. As he stated, it is only the beginning and not the end. The Commission argues that the reforms create a firm and fair European system that combines stronger external borders with greater solidarity among member states. Thank you for tuning in, and I encourage you to subscribe to our channel for fresh content on crucial global matters. Additionally, please like the video and share your insights on the topic in the comments section below. Have a wonderful day.